Have you ever wondered how many mysteries might be hidden within the people the world insists on ignoring? Stay until the end and discover how a homeless man in Germany was able to completely change the course of a trial with mere words. Klaus Müller pushed his old, rust-covered shopping cart through the frozen streets of Berlin. The worn-out wheels squeaked as they slid across the wet asphalt. At 58, Klaus had become part of the urban landscape, a forgotten face that people passed by with empty eyes. With his long, grey and unkempt beard covering a face wrinkled by time and hardship, he wore filthy, tattered clothes that told without words the story of nearly a decade spent living on the streets. Every morning he took his usual spot on the steps of Berlin's Court of Justice. There he held out an old metal cup, discreetly extending it to the hurried passers-by. Impeccably dressed lawyers walked past without even noticing his presence. Stern-faced judges passed by as if he were part of the pavement. Even the courthouse staff went out of their way to avoid making eye contact. To all of them, Klaus was just another social burden, an uncomfortable presence in the pristine landscape of justice. What no one could imagine was that behind that seemingly defeated figure was a sharp, observant mind, recording everything around him in minute detail. On the coldest afternoons, Klaus sought refuge in the Berlin Central Library, a place where the warmth was free and silence abundant. While other homeless individuals dozed off in dark corners, he sat at any available table and immersed himself in the pages of abandoned newspapers. Der Spiegel, Le Monde, The Guardian, Pravda. Each article he read fueled his eager mind. The library staff had grown used to his presence. He never caused any trouble, just kept to himself, silently reading about diplomacy, global economics, and geopolitics. His dirty, calloused hands turned the pages with surprising care, and his faded blue eyes gleamed with a vitality that starkly contrasted with his disheveled appearance. At night, Klaus slept wherever he could, park benches, storefront awnings, or, if lucky, in a bed at the municipal shelter. Even on nights when the cold seemed to cut through bone, he remained faithful to his ritual, writing everything he observed in a small notebook. He noted details about people, fragments of conversations, behavioral patterns. What he never shared was where he came from. What circumstances had brought him there? What had he lost? What pain had driven him to accept the streets as home? These answers remained buried, guarded with the same care he gave to his few belongings in the cart. To the outside world, Klaus Müller was just another man on the margins, a symbol of failure, but behind those tired eyes was a mind shaped by years of experience and learning, ready to emerge at the exact right moment. From the courthouse steps, he witnessed whispered conversations, secret meetings, and movements that seemed at the very least suspicious. His anonymity made him invisible, and that invisibility granted him access to information powerful people would never suspect was being observed. And that seemingly trivial detail would soon become his greatest advantage. Have you ever judged someone just by their appearance? Have you ever ignored a person without knowing their story? Maybe it's time to think about that. Often the greatest wisdom comes from where you least expect it. Meanwhile, in a small law office, attorney Dr. Maria Silva paced back and forth, clearly worried. The international corruption case she had taken on was becoming increasingly complex. Stefan Richter, a prominent German businessman, was accused of bribery and money laundering. He claimed innocence, but the evidence against him kept piling up. The main issue was finding a witness to confirm suspicious meetings near the courthouse gatherings that, according to investigators, took place in public spots like cafes or sidewalks, under the pretense of being among the people, making the actions less noticeable. "Dr. Maria," said her assistant, rushing in. "I spoke to some courthouse staff. They mentioned a homeless man who's always on the steps. Maybe he saw something." Maria took a deep breath. The idea of relying on a homeless person in such a high-stakes case seemed risky, but she was running out of options. The next day, still uncertain, Maria went to the courthouse. She found Klaus sitting as usual, metal cup in hand. She hesitated before approaching. "Excuse me," she said, crouching beside him. "I'm Maria Silva, a lawyer. May I ask you a few questions?" Klaus looked up, visibly surprised by the respectful tone. "Questions about what, ma'am?" She briefly explained the case and mentioned Stefan Richter, asking if he had noticed any suspicious meetings. Klaus's eyes lit up. "Stefan Richter," he muttered thoughtfully. "Tall, grey hair, always wears a navy blue suit and a red tie." "Exactly," Maria responded, excited. Klaus nodded. "I've seen him for months, always meeting different people, men with foreign accents, well-dressed women speaking other languages, always on Mondays, around 3 in the afternoon, at that cafe on the corner." The accuracy of his account left Maria speechless. Klaus spoke with clarity, confidence, and vivid detail. It was as if he had a photographic memory. "Would you be willing to testify in court?" she asked cautiously. Klaus studied her in silence for a moment. "Why would you believe me?" Maria replied sincerely. "Because your account is the most precise I've heard in this case, and because I believe every person deserves to be heard, no matter their situation." 2 days later, Klaus received an official subpoena. News of it spread quickly through the courthouse and became a joke among clerks and attorneys. Hans Weber, the prosecutor, was outraged. "This is absurd, Maria. You're putting a drunk bum on the stand. Are you trying to turn this court into a circus?" But Maria stood firm. There was something about Klaus, something beyond appearance that made her trust him. A hidden intelligence beneath the rags, a quiet dignity in his eyes. The day of the trial dawned bitterly cold. The night before, Klaus had been able to sleep at the shelter, where he showered and trimmed his beard. Maria had provided clean clothes, a simple suit, a white shirt, and a modest tie. Even dressed neatly, the signs of life on the streets couldn't be entirely hidden. When he entered the courtroom, murmurs swept the room. Lawyers whispered, clerks exchanged glances, and some jurors frowned. Prosecutor Hans Weber watched with a smug look. In his career, he was known for dismantling weak witnesses, and to him, a homeless man would be easy prey. "Your Honor," Hans began, addressing Judge Petra Hoffmann, "I object to the admissibility of this witness. How can we trust someone in his condition?" The judge, a seasoned and firm woman, frowned. "Every citizen has the right to be heard in this courtroom, Mr. Weber. Proceed." Klaus was led to the witness stand. His hands, still rough from life on the streets, were clean. He sat with surprising poise. "Please state your name for the court," Hans said with sarcasm. "Klaus Müller," he replied firmly. "And your occupation, Mr. Müller?" asked the prosecutor with a smirk. "Today, I survive by asking for help on the streets." The honest response drew a few stifled laughs. Stefan Richter, the defendant, watched curiously, trying to place the man's face. Hans approached like a predator. "Mr. Müller, do you consume alcohol or drugs? Could that impair your memory?" Maria stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant." "Sustained," said the judge. Switching tactics, Hans asked, "People in your situation often confuse imagination with reality. Why should we believe what you say?" Klaus looked him straight in the eye. "Herr Weber," he replied in flawless, formal German. The prosecutor was taken aback by the tone. Klaus then translated into fluent Portuguese. "I understand your skepticism, but everything I've described is true." The courtroom fell silent. Klaus's eloquence shattered every expectation. His speech revealed education and culture. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "Mr. Müller, Where did you learn to speak German so precisely? Klaus hesitated for a moment. I was born in Berlin, Your Honor. German is my native language. But there was something deeper in his tone, a weight, an untold story. Have you ever been unfairly judged by your appearance or circumstances? Have you ever faced prejudice without a chance to explain? Share your story. Tales like these deserve to be remembered. Dr. Maria had prepared straightforward questions, but something about Klaus's demeanor made her realize he could go much further. Mr. Müller, she began gently, could you tell the court about the meetings you witnessed between the defendant, Stefan Richter, and others? Klaus took a deep breath before beginning his testimony, speaking with a clarity that stunned the room. For the past 16 Mondays, I've observed the defendant meeting with various individuals at Café Einstein, about 50 meters from this courthouse. His speech was precise, almost clinical. The first meeting I witnessed was with a man in his 40s. Dark hair, spoke German with a strong Russian accent. The conversation centered on bank transfers to accounts in Zurich. Stefan Richter visibly paled. The information was so specific and damning that tension immediately gripped the room. Prosecutor Weber burst out, "Your Honor, how can a homeless man have access to confidential conversations?" Klaus calmly turned toward him and said, "Prefer English." His English was not only fluent, but carried the polished intonation of someone who had used it professionally. The courtroom was stunned into silence. Klaus continued in English, and the judge, visibly interested, encouraged him. "Mr. Müller, please go on." Then, to everyone's astonishment, Klaus switched to impeccable French. Le deuxième contact était une femme d'origine française qui représentait des intérêts immobiliers à Monaco. Elle et M. Richter ont discuté de l'achat de propriétés pour blanchir des fonds provenant d'activités illégales. His refined pronunciation betrayed a deep familiarity with the language typical of someone who had lived in France or worked in diplomatic circles. As he spoke, Richter began to sweat and whisper frantically to his attorney, slowly realizing where he had seen that face so many times on the courthouse steps. Klaus then returned to Portuguese. On the third Monday, the defendant met with a representative of a Russian mining company. The conversation was in Russian and dealt with illegal payments to African officials in exchange for diamond mining licenses. Hans Weber interrupted again, incredulous. "Are you saying you understand Russian too?" With an expression of calm and a touch of quiet superiority, Klaus answered fluently, "Да, я свободно говорю по-русски. Этот человек обсуждал взятки должностным лицам в Анголе и Демократической Республике Конго." Then he translated calmly, "Yes, I speak Russian fluently. This man was discussing bribes to government officials in Angola and the Democratic Republic of the Congo." The courtroom was frozen. The prosecutor, who minutes earlier had mocked Klaus's credibility, was now speechless. Judge Petra Hoffmann leaned forward, visibly intrigued. "Mr. Müller," she asked, "how many languages do you speak?" He hesitated briefly, debating how much more to reveal. "6, Your Honor. I speak German, English, French, Russian, Arabic, and Mandarin." The impact was immediate. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged astonished looks, and even the court clerks stopped what they were doing to listen. The collective perception was shifting. Klaus was no longer seen as just another homeless man. His background was clearly extraordinary. Sensing that his voice was finally being taken seriously, Klaus continued with growing confidence. On the 6th Monday, the defendant met with a businessman from the Middle East. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke fluent Arabic. تحدث عن غسيل الأموال من خلال مشاريع البناء في دبي والكويت. ناقشوا تحويل ملايين يورو من شركات وهمية. He then translated, They were talking about laundering money through construction projects in Dubai and Kuwait. They discussed the transfer of 10 million euros using shell companies. Stefan Richter was now sweating profusely. His most discreet meetings, held in languages he assumed were incomprehensible to anyone nearby, had been completely deciphered by the invisible man he had never once acknowledged. Klaus continued. Last Monday, there was a meeting with Chinese investors. Switching languages once again, he spoke Mandarin with precise intonation and accurate tones. 他们讨论了通过在香港和新加坡的投资来吸钱，这些中国商人提到了总共5000万欧元的转移。Then, naturally translating into English, he said, they discussed laundering money through investments in Hong Kong and Singapore. They mentioned the transfer of 50 million euros. The room was utterly silent. Hans Weber had already given up any attempt to discredit Klaus. The judge, however, was not just impressed, she was visibly intrigued. Mr. Müller, she said with deep respect, your language skills are remarkable, but more than that, your understanding of finance, international law, and complex business dealings suggests a very specific background. Klaus took a deep breath. He had known this moment would come. Your Honor, before I ended up on the streets, my life was completely different. The judge asked gently, what was your profession? Klaus looked around the courtroom. Every eye was on him, a mix of astonishment, curiosity, and reverence. I was Germany's ambassador to the United Nations for 12 years. Before that, I worked for 15 years at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, specializing in international trade negotiations and anti-corruption initiatives. The impact was immediate. The silence in the room was so heavy, one could hear people breathing. Hans Weber looked like he had seen a ghost. Dr. Maria, on the other hand, smiled calmly. Her instincts had been right all along. I hold a PhD in international law from Heidelberg University and a master's degree in applied linguistics from the Sorbonne. Klaus continued. Throughout my career, I represented Germany in over 100 international conferences on financial crimes and money laundering. Richter was now completely defeated. He hadn't just been exposed by someone he ignored, he had been watched by a world-renowned expert. Judge Hoffman, her voice filled with emotion, asked him, how did someone with such experience and knowledge end up in your current situation? Klaus closed his eyes for a moment. The pain was still evident, even after all these years. 8 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter in a car accident. I was the one driving. Since then, I was consumed by guilt and depression. I walked away from my career, my home, everything. The streets were the only place I could bear to be. The courtroom remained in absolute silence. Everyone absorbed the depth of his tragedy. Even while living on the streets, Klaus never stopped observing, thinking, understanding. The invisibility forced upon him had become a silent weapon of awareness. Turning to Richter, he said, you made the classic mistake so many criminals make. You believed people deemed insignificant posed no threat. You held your meetings around me as if I didn't exist. Looking at the judge, he continued, over the past few months, I've mentally stored an extensive network of international corruption involving around 200 million euros across 6 countries. I can provide dates, names, account numbers, and precise transaction details. The revelation caused a stir. Dr. Maria could barely contain her excitement. The case had grown far beyond what she had imagined. Hans Weber, in a last-ditch effort to control the damage, asked, and how can we verify this information? For the first time since entering the courtroom, Klaus smiled. I recommend contacting Interpol, the FBI, and the anti-corruption departments of the mentioned countries. Many of these operations are already under investigation, but they're missing pieces I can provide." The judge stood, visibly moved. "Mr. Klaus Müller, on behalf of the German court and justice system, I offer you my sincerest apologies for the treatment you received here today. Your contribution is not only valuable, it is heroic." Stefan Richter was immediately arrested. He attempted to negotiate a deal, but the evidence Klaus presented was irrefutable. After the trial, international organizations flooded Klaus with job offers. He declined most of them. "I've learned that true wealth lies in purpose and inner peace, not in positions or salaries," he explained. He accepted a small apartment provided by the Berlin government and began working as a translator and consultant on international investigations. More importantly, he started giving lectures on how social prejudice blinds society to hidden talent. 3 months after the trial, he received an unexpected phone call. "Dad!" The voice on the other end made him cry like he hadn't in years. "It's me, Anna. I've been looking for you for so long." His daughter, whom he believed had died in the accident, had survived. She had been in a coma and, upon waking, learned Klaus had disappeared. The televised trial had led her to him. The reunion was life-changing. Anna, now 28, was an international journalist who had inherited her father's gift for languages. "Dad," she said during their first dinner in 8 years, "you didn't just save a court case. You showed the world that true human value has nothing to do with appearance." Today, Klaus is living a new chapter. Every week, he returns to the places where he once lived on the streets, speaking with the homeless, offering support, and reminding everyone that dignity does not depend on appearances or circumstances. "The streets taught me more about human nature than any embassy ever did. There, I discovered that we are all vulnerable. We can all fall, but we also have the capacity to rise again. What makes the difference is who chooses to see us as human beings." Klaus Müller's story became a landmark in the fight against social prejudice. His testimony not only brought down a criminal, but opened society's eyes to the value hidden in the most unexpected places. And you? How did this story make you feel? Have you ever lived something similar? Leave a comment below and share your experience. Your voice helps spread messages of empathy, justice, and humanity.